In your folders, you will find also a research paper that we presented at the Mediterranean Research Meeting organized by the European University Institute last March, where we presented the result of the research in the water sector. So I won't spend so much time for this presentation because you can find all the information in that paper. But in any case, I just wanted to explain you how the research was made and what was the methodology. And I know that it is not fair, but I will use a couple of slides just to make things shorter, actually. Well.
It is the privilege of the project manager.
For example, instead of quoting all the 14 countries that participated, I can just show you the map, so you can see. I mean, as Franco said, the research was made on 6 different sectors, so water, urban waste, local public transport, district heating, distribution of gas, and distribution of electricity at local level. We had 14 country experts that decided to be accepted to be involved in this research. Actually, we had more than 14, but not all of them worked on all the sectors. They picked up the sectors where they were most expert on. And the research was divided in 2 main parts. The first part was setting the questions. I mean, we started to delete for a moment everything which is written on handbooks, etc. Try to go to the basics and asking ourselves what are the most relevant questions according to us to understand the regulatory framework of a certain sector and in a certain country, and to make them comparable also. Okay, we identified some topics, then we share them with the network. We collect a lot of contributions, and finally we came up with a list of around 15-20 questions, as Franco said, and you can find them in a table which is attached to the paper and it is in the folder also. While with this image, we try to show the logic links that there are between the questions and the topics. So as you see, first of all, we asked about the ownership of assets. Then we searched about who plan investments, how services are assigned, so by public tender, by direct assignment, by other forms maybe. Who is the contracting authority, and what is the duration of concessions, which is very important under the point of view of incentives for actors being involved in the process. And who are the services, the operators of the service. And at the same time, we made some questions about regulation in the strict sense. I mean, the questions on the left column are meant to create a framework to understand which is the legislative and institutional framework in the country. And then related to regulation, we asked if there is a ad hoc regulatory body in that country. If yes, if it is a single sector or multi-sector regulatory body. So in the case of water, is there a regulatory body in charge just of water issues, or maybe also electricity, gas, etc.? Who appoints who? So it was interesting to see if it was the government, the ministry, appointing the president, for example, of the agency, or there were other kind of appointments. And finally, and I know this is quite a I mean, this question is, the answer is based on personal perception of the national situation, but which is the level of independence, both at political level, but also at market level, related to some phenomenon like revolving doors between utilities and regulatory agencies, etc. And you know, just here you see the questions that were then posed to our country experts, but they are, each question is related to a specific issue. These are the countries analyzed. So as you see, most of them are concentrated in the European Mediterranean area, some Middle East. Okay, we would be delighted in the future to enlarge the geographical scope of this research. Well, just to give you some examples of the results of the research, the first result was to perceiving that there is not a model of regulatory framework which is spread around the countries, but the regulatory framework is strictly linked to the institutional and law system at local level, and also cultural elements, etc. But for example, what we discovered is that in most countries analyzed, there is a fully public provision of water services, in the sense that the responsibility for providing the service is public, but then we can have private operators that deliver the service in particular. We studied also the specific case of Tenerife, where there is a particular situation, and you can find it in the paper. Then we looked at the ownership of water works and plants, and for example we saw that in most countries the ownership is public, solely public, and there are some cases where ownership of assets it's both public and private. We didn't find examples of private ownership in the countries, solely private ownership in the countries analyzed. And yeah, and in most cases, ownership is allocated at local level. And then we tried it also to overlap some questions in order to see if there could be some interaction between different aspects. So for example, between who manages the services and how are services assigned. Or maybe who owns the assets, and who is in charge of tendering the service. And so you see that in many cases where the local governments have the ownership of waterworks and plants, they are also in charge of tendering the services. And if the ownership is at the state level, normally the tendering is made at national level. It is also interesting to look at the structure of revenues. As you know, in Europe, we have the European Water Framework Directive, which is pushing for the full cost recovery system. So we think that this is also the reason why most European countries has this structure with a full coverage of the service by customer bills, while in other countries you have also state subsidies covering the cost of the services. In other cases you have EU or international funds, especially in Eastern Europe. And this slide summarizes some of the questions about regulation in strict sense. So is regulation enforced at national or local level? Does an ad hoc regulatory body exist? Is it a multi-sector or single-sector agency? Well, we discovered that ad hoc national regulatory body exists in 6 countries out of 14 countries analyzed, for example. In other cases, the regulatory tasks are incorporated in the tasks of another authority, like, for example, the ministry could be. And that there is an ongoing tendency towards the creation of ad hoc regulatory agencies at national level, for example, the case of Algeria, or the inclusion of water regulation amongst the responsibility of existing multi-sector agencies like Italy, but also Latvia. Well, the issue of how to enforce regulation at local level in countries where the territorial dimension and complexity makes it hard to manage regulation at national level can be an issue that that need the discussion.